The nation's railroads become the conduit of a killer. He strikes at random, then disappears. Recurring clues tell police they face the worst predator of all, a ritual serial killer. He's cunning, deadly, and on the move. But the authorities are determined to stop him in his tracks.
More than 200,000 miles of train track crossed the United States. From California to Kentucky, few living near a railroad felt safe in the summer of 1999. A serial killer rode the rails, picking towns and victims at random. He left behind a trail of bloodshed, but no trace of where he would turn up next. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As the number of victims grew, the FBI enlisted the help of a profiler to help predict the killer's next move.
On December 17, 1998, in West University Place, Texas, a young woman called the police from outside the house of a friend she worked with. She was worried about her. She told them that her friend, a prominent doctor at a nearby medical school, had failed to show up at work that morning.
222, we'll be arriving on the scene.
Look, here they are.
According to her colleague, this was completely out of character. She had not responded to phone calls to the house all day, nor had she answered her door.
When we hung up, everything was fine. She said she'd see me tomorrow. Nothing out of the ordinary, and that was yesterday.
The colleague was sure that something was wrong.
So much for coming. It's just not like her to do this. I'm just very concerned about
The
it.
doors and windows of the house were locked. From the outside, everything seemed normal.
It's just not like her to miss an important paper, an important day like this.
The officers found that the garage door was unlocked. And inside, the door to the house, wide open. Jewelry on the floor suggested a robbery.
222, I'm ready to use the bag with you as possible for it.
The house had been ransacked. The officers moved cautiously. An intruder could still be inside. The downstairs was clear. But a trail of clothes led to the second floor. In the master bedroom, they found the doctor. She had been brutally murdered.
222, let me have a supervisor and a crime scene unit to the scene.
Detective Kenneth Maha responded to the scene. Though a 10-year veteran of the department, he was surprised by the report of a homicide.
West University Place, just a small little suburb, 2.2 square miles, right in the middle of Houston, largely residential and an affluent community. The last time we had a murder was in 1985 during a robbery of a pharmacy.
The brutality of the crime struck the detective.
Blood spatter was all over the place in the hallway and on the walls and the door. The body was completely covered except for one arm sticking out and her two legs. There was a large butcher knife that was near the body, laying on a pillow.
Investigators also recovered a heavy, blood-spattered blunt object nearby. Both were weapons of opportunity the killer found in the house. Police contacted the doctor's husband and learned he had taken the couple's 2 children out of town to visit relatives before Christmas. They'd been gone for several days.
The victim had work obligations to take care of that week, so she was not able to travel with him.
Take a look at this over here.
Evidence suggested that the killer had taken his time in the house. He tore open Christmas gifts and rummaged through the victim's belongings.
Contents of her purse were spilled out, and her driver's license was clearly left out and displayed. It was quite strange to see it like that.
In the kitchen, the detective found partially eaten fruit. Possibly more evidence the killer had lingered in the house. He also found the keys to the victim's Jeep. According to the doctor's husband, it was the only set. In the garage, there were no foreign fingerprints at the suspected point of entry. But on a workbench, investigators found the broken cover of a steering column next to some pry tools. The killer must have stolen the victim's Jeep.
We surmised then that he had to break the steering column of the Jeep to actually crank it up and to start it.
Here, the murderer made a crucial mistake.
When I picked up the large piece of the steering column, I could visibly see fingerprints on the shiny black plastic.
The column cover was bagged for later analysis at the lab. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined cause of death: multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma to the head. The victim had been sexually assaulted. The gruesome nature of the murder worried Detective Maha.
It just didn't fit the pattern of a random killing. It was a step beyond.
Investigators knew that killers like this usually don't strike only once. 2 days later, and 200 miles away, San Antonio police found an abandoned Jeep in a motel parking lot. The plates were traced to West University Place. It belonged to the doctor. The plastic cover of the steering column was missing. Inside, investigators found a guitar and a meat cleaver. The doctor's husband had noted that both items were missing from the house. Someone had hotwired the Jeep in a hurry.
We noticed too that the steering column was just in absolute disarray.
The Jeep was fingerprinted inside and out, but technicians found no usable prints. At the police department's forensics lab, analysts made electronic copies of the fingerprints lifted from the Jeep's steering column cover and ran them through an automated matching system.
And at that time, we got a positive match on an individual named Carlos Rodriguez.
A computer check revealed another name, Rafael Resendez Ramirez. This was forwarded to the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division. A search of their extensive database revealed dozens of other aliases and more information on Resendez. He had an extensive record going back more than 20 years and an active warrant on a stolen vehicle charge. Investigators reviewed the suspect's file from the Immigration and Naturalization Service and learned Resendez traveled regularly and illegally between the United States and Mexico. Most recently, he had been arrested in California for trespassing on railroad property with a loaded firearm and was deported to Mexico. Now it appeared that Rafael Resendez was back in Texas. His transient lifestyle would make him difficult to find. Detective Maha searched the suspect's records for a place to start and found the name of the fugitive's sister. She lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In a prearranged phone conference, Maha spoke with her at the Albuquerque Police Department.
I'd be able to get some things, some information about your brother, if that'd be all right. She wasn't able to tell me a whole lot about current activity of her brother. She did not have much contact with him. She did mention that he would sometimes drift through Albuquerque, stay with her for a few days, and then just disappear.
Detective Maha asked her to call if she heard from her brother.
And I think there was a little bit of anger and resentment on her part at having to be involved with it. She really didn't want to be associated with him, if indeed he was a real killer as we thought that he was.
Authorities also asked the public for help. They distributed wanted posters along the train routes Resendez was known to use. Dozens of tips turned up nothing. In March, 3 months after the doctor's murder, there was a series of reported sightings in rail yards near San Antonio. Resendez had traveled 200 miles west. Each time, he fled before police could respond. The suspected killer was still on the move, hopping trains and eluding authorities. With thousands of miles of train tracks to choose from, Rafael Resendez could be anywhere. Five months after the doctor's murder, and only 90 miles away in Weimar, Texas, members of a local church went to check on their pastor. He and his wife had not been at church that morning.
The door's wide open. Pastor! Pastor!
The couple was found, murdered in their own bed. Weimar's a small town. Murder is nearly unheard of. Texas Rangers and the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene. The preacher and his wife had been bludgeoned to death with a sledgehammer, a weapon of opportunity taken from their garage. The coroner set time of death at 24 to 36 hours earlier. The couple had been murdered late Friday or early Saturday morning. Money and valuables lay in plain sight. Robbery was clearly not the motive. Deputies processed the bedroom with luminol, a chemical that reacts to the protein in blood and other bodily fluids. It revealed the victim's blood and bodily fluid from an unknown source. Forensic testing later revealed the woman had been sexually assaulted. It appeared that after the murders, the killer had lingered at the crime scene. He ate in the victim's kitchen and took his time studying their driver's licenses. The investigators at the scene were unaware of the West University Place murder, but not for long. In May 1999, Texas authorities were on the trail of a fugitive, Rafael Resendez. Fingerprints implicated him in the murder of a doctor in West University Place. 4 months later, a preacher and his wife were found beaten to death in their home in Weimar. The couple's red pickup truck was missing, probably stolen by the killer. Police put out an APB for the vehicle. At the Department of Public Safety, investigators from the Texas Rangers were troubled by the crime scene. The evidence in the house, partially eaten food and displayed ID cards, suggested a ritualistic killer. The Rangers contacted the FBI's Houston field office to get the opinion of a criminal profiler, Special Agent Mark Young.
You have in a crime scene a lot of messages, a lot of forensic evidence, and a lot of behavioral evidence. You can pick up not only the forensics, the fingerprints, the DNA, the hairs and fibers, and those types of things, but you can also get a look into the offender's behavior. The way he commits that crime is unique. It's different than any other offender.
Young noted that this killer acted with extreme rage, but no sign of panic.
What really struck me behaviorally was this offender, unlike a lot of others, spent an incredible amount of time in that house going through everything. Their wallet and purse, respectively, were opened up, and their identification was showing. In other words, the offender sat there and looked at their photographs, not taking any credit cards, not taking any cash.
Profilers can analyze a killer's behavioral choices in an attempt to reveal details about him. In this case, after killing the victims, the perpetrator kept striking with his weapon. But then he covered their bodies. This suggested perhaps even he was repelled by the results of his actions. Displaying the victim's ID cards might be an act of domination, as if he wanted details about the lives he had taken. One of the Texas Rangers Young spoke to had seen something like this before.
He realized, because he had some knowledge of the case in West University, that some of the same types of things had happened. And he said, hey guys, could this be connected? Not only are we looking at some MO that seems similar, but we're looking at behavior, this ritualistic behavior, or what we call sometimes signature of an offender.
If there was a connection between the two cases, the forensics lab would find it.
One of the advantages we had is that we had forensic evidence in both places. We had fingerprints and DNA evidence in the West University case. We also had DNA evidence at the Weimar location.
DNA analysis revealed that the bodily fluid recovered in both cases matched. The same man sexually assaulted both women. Since the first victim's Jeep had been recovered, investigators wondered how the killer got to the second crime scene. In both cases, a vehicle had been stolen after the crime.
That would have meant, traditionally, that somebody had to bring the person there, or that they were somebody from close by.
Young studied the case file of suspect Rafael Resendez.
There was information already in that fugitive investigation indicating that Resendez got around by train.
According to the file, there were train tracks 50 yards from the doctor's house in West University Place.
We turned around and looked. There's a train track immediately across the street from the Weimar location.
With the two cases directly connected, investigators believed Rafael Resendez was a ritual serial killer.
The manner that he did these crimes is somewhat evolutionary. You don't just wake up one day and boom, get involved in that type of crime. It's something that you've practiced, you've built up to, and you've done before. And he's not going to stop all of a sudden either.
They feared Resendez was using stolen vehicles and the railroads to find his next victim. At the Houston field office, the FBI's fugitive squad joined the hunt for Resendez. Special Agent Bobby Eckert led the investigation.
We knew that he had fled the jurisdiction and had most likely traveled interstate and, in fact, into Mexico.
Because Resendez had likely left Texas, they obtained an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant. It would allow the FBI to add its federal resources to the hunt.
The first thing that we wanted to do is to find out everything that we possibly could about Resendez. We knew that he had been arrested over 13 times. I immediately started getting all the prison record pin packets so that I could identify not only relatives but associates, determine his patterns. All the interviews revealed to us that this was a man who was not well known by anybody. His family had not really had a lot of contact with him since he left home at 12 years of age and moved to Acapulco and eventually to Florida.
With little to go on, criminal profiler Mark Young tried to unlock the drifter's past to predict his next move. He forwarded details of both cases to analysts at the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. VICAP analysts use sophisticated databases to identify similar unsolved cases.
Immediately, they were able to return to me a case in Lexington, Kentucky. A Hispanic male had assaulted a college student and murdered her boyfriend. This happened late at night in 1997 near the railroad tracks where these two had been walking. The male was killed by his skull being crushed by a rock, and the female was sexually assaulted. She was also physically assaulted, pretty severe injuries.
Though dazed by the attack, the young woman somehow survived. Seeing that her boyfriend was dead, she made her way to a nearby house where residents called the police.
She was able to give them an artist depiction, a local artist, of the offender.
Young received the sketch from the Lexington Police Department.
I compared it, and I didn't immediately say, wow, you know, this is him. What I felt was kind of a guarded optimism that this could be the same guy.
But a sketch isn't proof. Young needed scientific evidence to be sure. He learned that the Lexington police still had DNA samples from the sexual assault 2 years earlier, and arranged for the samples to be flown to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. At the DNA analysis unit, examiners began processing the samples.
A couple samples to be worked.
Examiner Alan Giusti.
Homicide out of Kentucky. We look at 13 different unique DNA regions, and we develop an individual profile at each one of those regions. I describe it like looking at a person's physical characteristics. You can look at one DNA region and it might be the same as another person's. And that'd be like saying that two people both have brown eyes. Well, that's very common. You look at 13 different DNA regions, it's like saying somebody has brown eyes, is left-handed, is 6'3", is got red hair. The more DNA regions you look at, the more complete the picture you get of the person.
After mapping the DNA profile of the perpetrator from Lexington, Giusti contacted the examiners in Texas who had mapped the samples from Weimar and West University Place.
By comparing the results that I obtained with the results they obtained, we were both able to determine that we had a possible common donor. In other words, the same person was committing these crimes.
In Texas, Young forwarded the news to the other investigators.
I was able to call Lexington PD, and I heard a lot of hooping and hollering because they thought it was going to be an unsolved case.
Lexington police now had Rafael Resendez as their prime suspect. Authorities across the Southwest canvassed homeless shelters and train yards. They knew Resendez was out there, somewhere. On May 28th, authorities found the preacher's truck abandoned near a train yard in San Antonio. It looked like Resendez had returned to the rails. Finding him would be an overwhelming task for Special Agent Eckert and her team.
We had never faced this type of obstacle before. There are thousands of tracks, there are thousands of trains every day. And it was difficult to determine which line that he rode.
With a massive search area to cover, they had to be resourceful.
One way we handled this is we developed a small wanted poster that we gave to the people that frequently rode the railroads.
In train yards across the nation, locals were advised to be on the lookout for Rafael Resendez. If they spotted him, they should call the FBI fugitive squad immediately.
When we received these calls, we would contact the railroad police. They would pull the person off the train and identify them.
Agents and railroad police responded to hundreds of sightings. Each time, it wasn't Resendez. The FBI's best lead was the fugitive's sister in New Mexico. Agents stayed in contact with her, hoping she might hear from him.
If for any reason he's contacting you,
and if she did hear from him, they hoped she'd talk.
No, I told you the last time we spoke that...
So far, it seemed the only way to track Resendez was to follow a trail of bodies. On June 4th, 1999, a Fayette County, Texas woman stopped by her mother's house to check on her. The 73-year-old widow lived alone. The house had been ransacked.
Mom?
There was no sign of her mother.
Mom?
As she searched each room, her panic rose.
Mother!
Then, in the bedroom, she found her mother's body. The elderly woman had been bludgeoned to death. In 1999, agents were on the trail of Rafael Resendez, linked to 4 murders in Texas and Kentucky. As his notoriety grew, the press dubbed him the Railroad Killer. Now, an elderly widow had been murdered in rural Fayette County, Texas. Like the other victims, she lived near a railroad. The gruesome crime looked like the work of Rafael Resendez, according to FBI Special Agent Mark Young.
When you looked at that real brutal style of murder, you felt like, yeah, we got to be dealing with the same guy, because she was covered similarly. There were jewelry boxes that had been opened up in other rooms. Things had been opened and gone through, and there were items taken.
It was a familiar and disturbing pattern. Cash and jewelry had been left behind. Instead, the killer stole trinkets and personal items, as if taking souvenirs. Fingerprints in the laundry room indicated the killer had broken in through a rear window. The print was later matched to Resendez. After slaying his victim, he was in no rush to leave.
Not only did he go around to all of the rooms, take certain items, and spend an inordinate amount of time, he went and had some fruit and some bread, which was a thing that we had seen a number of times.
Food that's been eaten.
I take that to be more of a signature, showing that I totally own and dominate this individual and their belongings, more than I'm hungry and I need something to eat.
Two distinctive clues at the Fayette County scene seemed intended as a message to investigators. A newspaper had been placed on the sofa, open to an article about the recovery of the preacher's stolen vehicle. In a guest bedroom, they found a toy train. It had been recently unpacked and set up on the bed. It seemed the railroad killer was taunting the authorities.
Right.
A canine unit followed his scent to the train tracks. From there, the trail went cold. Less than 24 hours later, the next victim was discovered. Another gruesome murder near railroad tracks. This one 95 miles from Fayette County.
I got a call in regard to a crime scene in Houston that was being assessed by the Houston Police Department. They were noticing some similarities.
A 26-year-old school teacher was found sexually assaulted and bludgeoned to death in her bedroom. Her driver's license had been removed from her wallet and displayed on a table. Like the other victims, she lived near railroad tracks. The teacher's car, a white Honda sedan, had been stolen. Later DNA analysis confirmed Resendez had assaulted the woman. Now he was killing at a much faster pace.
One of the concerns we did have was that this guy was going to evolve into what we call a spree killer. A lot of times in the past, we've had serial killers, Ted Bundy, for instance, that the pressure got so great that they went into a spree mode, and that is they began to kill a number of victims with really no cooling off period.
With his last two victims killed in a 24-hour period, it appeared Resendez had made the shift to spree killer.
2014, three-step protection on the conductor. Stepping in, air and brake, go out.
On June 6th, a rail yard worker spotted the fugitive in Flatonia, Texas, halfway between Houston and San Antonio.
2014, we have a trespass on premises. Call Central Dispatch, running westbound.
He immediately notified local police and the FBI.
2014, we got an emergency situation. Mill Hispanic, westbound.
Once again, Resendez slipped away.
Okay, guys, we've got some additional information.
At the Houston FBI field office, Operation Train Stop was created. Now investigators from more than 30 agencies were assigned exclusively to the case.
You'll remember we got involved.
Special Agent Bobby Eckerd was part of the operation that was comprised of two basic squads.
You had the one squad that was the serial homicide investigators that were looking into the various homicides, developing evidence of crimes. Then the other side was the fugitive investigators that their sole purpose was to locate, apprehend, and arrest Resendez.
The fugitive squad looked for patterns in the suspect's past.
We were able to determine that he followed the crops throughout the United States. In Washington State, he followed the avocado route. In Florida, he would be involved in the citrus crops. In Kentucky and North Carolina, he would pick tobacco.
After identifying farm work sites and addresses of friends and family, agents would try to eliminate these comfort zones.
You go everywhere that you can possibly think of that the fugitive might show up. By going there, by law enforcement presence in those places, people aren't willing to help out the fugitive anymore.
But this fugitive was comfortable traveling fast and on his own without any help. And his murder spree was not yet over. 8 days after the school teacher was killed in Houston, her car was found 300 miles away near the Mexican border. Inside was a knife, but no sign of where Resendez had gone. Nearby were train tracks, giving the killer a clean escape to almost anywhere. In 1999, more than 30 law enforcement agencies hunted for Rafael Resendez, known as the Railroad Killer. Whenever a new crime appeared to be the work of the killer, Special Agent Mark Young investigated.
I was getting hundreds of calls from departments around the country wanting me to listen to their stories about their crimes and determine whether the cases might be linked.
On June 15th, the bodies of a 51-year-old woman and her father were discovered in their home in rural Gorham, Illinois. The local sheriff's office believed Resendez was involved and called Mark Young.
Sexual assault apparently took place.
As soon as we walked onto the scene, we could have been in one of our crime scenes in Texas. The double rail tracks were right behind the older man's residence.
The killer broke in through a back window. He used a weapon of opportunity, a shotgun he found in the home. He stole a few trinkets and ate the victim's food. But this time the killer had added something new, a statement scrawled on the wall.
A lot of people thought, oh God, we got some other type of offender here that's making a political statement. Pseudo-intellectual type individual.
But Young knew better. He had reviewed the fugitive's prison file, including his correspondence.
He had been writing political messages and letters that we were able to view in the past. That was even further indication to me that this is the same offender, because this now is the rest of his fantasy coming out.
In his own mind, Resendez was a deep political thinker. But authorities knew he was a vicious predator.
He was tied up in this chair. She was draped across the coffee table.
They believed he got to Gorham on the train and left in the victim's car, which was recovered the next day 60 miles south near the Kentucky border. Police across the country checked cold cases looking for murders Resendez might have committed. Special Agent Young investigated one in Hughes Springs, Texas. In October of 1998, a woman had been beaten to death with an antique flat iron. Though unsolved, the murder had been thoroughly investigated and documented.
And I felt like there was a good possibility that Resendez was responsible for that case too. Didn't you tell me? We had blunt force trauma. She was an elderly victim. She was not sexually assaulted, but she was covered in a similar fashion. And in looking at his crime scene photography, I see where her identification had been placed up as if the offender looked at it, because it happened at home.
Because the spree killer could be anywhere, the FBI placed Rafael Resendez on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. His mugshots were posted with 30 different aliases. Special Agent Bobby Eckert hoped it might shake new leads free.
What this does is it raises the awareness of the case, the fugitive status, and it also allowed for us to offer up to $50,000 for the successful apprehension of Resendez.
News of the Resendez case swept through the country. On heightened alert, agents and police searched hundreds of freight trains and train yards. It was as if Resendez had disappeared.
A violation.
Don Clark, then special agent in charge of the Houston field office, held press conferences to help spread the word. But he was candid about the case's difficulty.
It's a very complex investigation. It's one like many of us have never been involved with before. We are dealing with a lot of unknowns here. We're dealing with a lot of pieces of information, and it's a very difficult investigation for all of the agencies.
The story led news broadcasts nationwide. And with 8 victims now dead, the public was terrified.
8 is more than enough, many more than enough. 1 is more than enough. And that's all that I can assure the public, is that law enforcement is working together to try and get this person out of the street.
The fugitive was deceptively smart and incredibly dangerous. He could move across the country easily and slip across the border at will.
What we were trying to let people know was this is not some railroad hobo or bum that doesn't have any sense traveling around. This is a guy with a good IQ that knew how to evade law enforcement, that we needed a lot of assistance in capturing. This is a guy that was attacking innocent people in their sleep, and there was nobody really safe.
The reward for the fugitive's capture climbed to $125,000. Calls came in from all over the country.
I'd like to, thank you.
In late June, Resendez was spotted at a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky. But he never stayed in one place for long. Before the police could arrive, he was gone. Sergeant Mark Barnard of the Lexington, Kentucky Police Department warned the public.
If I lived near a railroad track, I'd certainly have it well lit. I'd check and make sure nothing is out of the ordinary. I'd know my environment, my neighbors. I'd check my doors and windows.
The tips kept coming.
We had 3,178 calls that came into the command post. From those calls, we generated over 1,100 leads. In other words, things that needed to be done throughout the United States and in Mexico.
One credible tip was phoned into the Denver field office. The caller reported seeing Resendez at a house in Commerce City, Colorado. After authorities traced a phone call from the house to the Mexico town where Resendez had family, a tactical arrest team responded and moved in for the capture. 7 months into the search for Rafael Resendez, an arrest team raided a house in Commerce City, Colorado. They secured the occupants and searched the house. But Resendez was nowhere to be found. And authorities later determined the tip was a case of mistaken identity. Texas Rangers and the FBI agents kept in contact with the fugitive's sister in New Mexico. She assured them that she had not heard from her brother, but promised that if he called, she would contact them.
I'd like to take a look at these photographs.
But at the FBI command post in Houston, the next big lead concerned a relative no one knew about before. Agents learned Resendez had a wife in Mexico. Special Agent Bobby Eckert followed up on the surprising new lead.
The command post became aware that he had a common-law wife because she was interviewed by Mexican media. And a local station got a copy of that interview and aired it locally. At that point, we brought his wife to Houston for a 2-day interview.
Authorities needed to know as much as they could about Resendez, his patterns, and the places he had stayed.
And did he write you all the time?
She provided us with a lot of information about Resendez and his habits over the last 2 or 3 years. She advised that he brought her jewelry, he brought her figurines, sometimes little angel figurines. He brought her a guitar. I knew that a lot of these items had been stolen from crime scenes, and it in fact turned out that these items were linked to the homicides.
She said Resendez had been in Mexico very recently, but she hadn't seen him in days.
How were you made aware of that?
She was cooperating because she feared he wasn't safe there. In Mexico, bounty hunters were after him. Resendez was running out of places to hide. On July 10th, 1999, investigators received a phone page from Albuquerque. It was the fugitive's sister.
Yes, I'm returning your call.
She needed to talk to authorities.
Okay, we're on our way.
According to Special Agent Mark Young.
There were relatives in Mexico that were being approached by law enforcement, by bounty hunters, by curiosity seekers.
Lopez, thank you for the page. Can you tell
There
me
were
what
people
was
that
going
really didn't care how they got him across. You know, dead or alive, I want the reward money.
Did he say where he
She said her brother had called her.
unarmed and alone?
She did not want him to be harmed.
Law enforcement told her that we could effect a safe surrender for him, and we would agreed to treat him humanely and get him in custody to resolve this thing.
On July 12, 1999, Rafael Resendez agreed to turn himself in to a Texas Ranger at a small border crossing.
Mendez, hands on your head.
Respecting his sister's wishes, authorities agreed to let him walk across and to take him in with a minimal arrest team. One of the most vicious serial killers in the nation's history was taken into custody quietly and without incident. In follow-up interviews with Mark Young, Resendez would confess to a total of 13 murders, 4 of them not yet connected to him by authorities.
He could recall in incredible detail crimes that occurred several years before. After discussions with him, I would contact the jurisdictions that had primary control of the investigations that he was referring to. And we resolved 2 homicides in Florida, Marion County, Florida, 1 in Colton, California, and 1 homicide in Barrow County, Georgia. You tell me the train.
The question in everyone's mind was why. In the interviews, Resendez made the sickening claim that he killed to wipe out evil. Yet among his victims were a doctor, a preacher and his wife, a teacher, and elderly people.
Did you murder?
All upstanding citizens, well loved by their families.
Yes.
The search for Rafael Resendez took 8 months and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. In court, he attempted to use an insanity defense to explain his crimes. But in May of 2000, he was found guilty of first-degree murder. 4 days later, Rafael Resendez was sentenced to death. A string of vicious bank robberies grows more violent with every holder, then ends in a deadly shootout. With a dangerous man on the run, police conduct an all-out search for a fugitive so desperate, he will stop at nothing to make his escape.
Two armed bank robbers hit a Seattle bank, taking over $150,000. But before they can escape, police confront them and the pair splits up. As authorities search block by block, they learn one was a career criminal with a long history of violence. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The suspect was smart and desperate to stay free. Agents chased him through the Caribbean and across cyberspace, determined to put an end to his career.
One of the FBI's primary responsibilities is investigating bank robberies. And they see more of these crimes in Seattle than just about any other place in the country. The FBI office there investigates every bank robbery in the state of Washington. Special Agent Mike Adams runs Seattle's robbery division.
Over the last 5 or 6 years, we've averaged 300 bank robberies a year, primarily here in the Seattle or King County area. Bank robberies are a big problem here in this area.
The FBI cites a high rate of drug addiction and the fact that Washington has a relatively large number of bank branches as reasons for this. The Seattle agents see two basic types of bank heists. Most are one-on-one robberies, when someone approaches a teller with a note and a quiet demand for cash.
Not necessarily a robber who cares to draw attention to him or herself by being extremely vocal or attempting to take over the banking operations.
The other kind of robbery is more rare and more dangerous. The takeover.
A takeover robbery is where we have one or more robbers who enter a bank and attempt to take over the banking operations through various means, either ordering people to the floor or ordering bank employees away from the teller counters. More often than not, in a takeover-style bank robbery, the bank robber or robbers are armed with firearms. So those are considered very violent as opposed to a one-on-one style bank robbery.
Agents note that whenever takeover bandits get away with it, they will usually rob again, becoming bolder and more violent with each new attempt. On May 17, 2000, one particularly vicious string of takeover-style robberies begins at a downtown Seattle bank.
Hurry up! All of it, all of it. I will shoot you right now, lady. I ain't playing with you. Get that.
Working quickly, they disappear in minutes with thousands of dollars in cash. A week later, thieves hit another area bank, brandishing bigger guns, intensifying their assault on unsuspecting patrons and employees. 2 weeks later, robbers strike again with even more aggression. Since takeover robberies are rare, agents believe the crimes were all perpetrated by the same bandits.
We did see bank robberies that did appear to be similar in nature in terms of the level of violence, in terms of large amounts of money. Certainly, a robbery of that nature is going to pique our attention because of the significant level of violence.
Yet each time, the robbers escape cleanly in stolen getaway cars, leaving no eyewitnesses who can ID the men. The FBI is facing a pair of seasoned criminals who grow more aggressive with each attack. Recognizing a pattern of behavior, authorities feel these violent robbers will turn deadly. 6 days later, on the morning of June 22nd, 2000, their worst fears are realized. Two men head down Aurora Avenue, then turn into the parking lot of Wells Fargo Bank. The people inside have no idea what's coming.
Boys and girls, try to get on the
the customers and employees. But they miss one. The robbers are organized. One stands guard, while the other finds a teller who can access the vault.
I'm asking you, do you have the key to the vault? Don't look at the key. Get over there.
The manager connects with police emergency.
Stay on the line. All units, we've had a bank robbery at 120 in Aurora.
A dispatcher puts out an urgent call about armed robbers still inside the bank.
204 received.
Seattle officer Wesley Buxton responds.
It was a bank robbery in progress. That's a little bit of an unusual call. We usually get bank alarms as opposed to bank robbery in progress.
Buxton races to the bank.
I said hurry up. Yeah. Come on, here, fill it up. Hurry up.
Inside the vault, the thief takes all the cash his two backpacks can hold. The teller follows orders, hoping the gunman won't kill her.
No phone calls or nothing, you understand me? None of that.
Buxton kills his siren as he approaches the bank.
I was the first one on the scene. There was a motorcycle sitting out in front of the bank. I believe it was up on the sidewalk. You really couldn't see in the bank.
Following procedure, the officer finds cover and waits for backup. Officer Rick Sprecher arrives and gets into position. The bandits emerge, unaware of the officers. They cannot get the motorcycle started.
They sat there like they were frozen for a minute in time, I guess trying to figure out why the motorcycle wouldn't start. And then they jumped off the motorcycle and they started running away from it.
Then, one suspect trips.
I had my gun on him and told him to stay down.
Buxton stays with the first gunman. Officer Sprecher orders the second to stop. But the man disappears. Then Officer Buxton is suddenly faced with the unthinkable.
It seemed like slow motion. I've heard the tape recording of it, and the shots were fired in quick succession. But at that time, it seemed like there were even maybe 1 or 2 seconds between the actual shots.
Put your weapon down!
Sprecher returns fire, finally stopping the gunman. Officers contain one suspect. The other is gone.
Got an officer down! Officer down! I need backup!
Officer Sprecher's call brings an intense law enforcement response. Emergency medical technicians work to stabilize Officer Buxton, while Officer Sprecher quickly briefs detectives.
He got shot 6 times. I muttered on him. Guys loose.
The man who shot the officer is dead.
Black jacket,
The hunt for the escaped suspect begins immediately.
One suspect at large, black helmet, black clothing.
A dispatcher broadcasts a description of the fleeing gunman on all police channels. FBI agents rush to the bank. Among them, Agent Mike Adams.
On my way to the bank, I did hear an officer was shot and was down. It was obviously a very violent takeover-style robbery.
Adams recognizes that these initial reports are similar to the 3 earlier robberies, and that the violence has escalated even further. With one armed gunman still on the loose, authorities quickly moved to contain the situation.
There were several people, bystanders, who were beginning to gather around. So Seattle police immediately took control of the scene because of the imminent danger and potential threat that still existed.
The Seattle Police Department directs their homicide unit to the scene, including Detective Paul Seguro.
Anytime there's officer-involved shooting where a Seattle police officer fires a weapon, we are called to investigate.
All law enforcement agencies begin working together to develop a plan to find the escaped gunman. Seattle police form an emergency command post to coordinate the effort.
Their assignment. Let's wrap it up right now. Take off, all right?
Members of our SWAT team had already started a search of the inner perimeter area.
Moving toward the general direction of the fleeing suspect, SWAT methodically searches every hiding space. They are careful, knowing that the gunman is desperate and could be anywhere.
Let's go! Right behind us, let's go!
Concerned for public safety, law enforcement swarms the area. Roads are blocked, traffic rerouted. Detective Sergeant David Ritter.
The bank robbery and subsequent police shooting led to a tremendous police presence in the area. We had dogs, we had the King County helicopter, the special weapons team.
The SWAT team goes door to door, warning everyone in the business district.
Anybody in here with me down the street? Businesses were shut down. We closed all the local businesses for the safety of the people because the suspect was still at large.
Okay, you guys are right. Just do that, please. Thank you.
After treating gunshot wounds in Officer Buxton's left arm and right shoulder, the emergency medical technicians take him to the hospital.
Both wounds, the bullet went in and out, so it was just a matter of cleaning it up and make sure there wasn't anything that would cause any kind of infection.
Special Agent Adams searches the downed bank robber for clues.
I pulled out his identification, which said his name was Daniel Del Fierro. He was not someone that, known to the FBI at that time, but nonetheless, certainly a name for us to conduct further follow-up investigation.
Investigators locate the .380 semi-automatic handgun used to shoot Buxton. In a belt pack, they find a .38 revolver. Agents also recover 2 backpacks full of cash.
A lot of the money in there was still in shrink wrap, delivered from the Federal Reserve Bank. Later, the money found in both backpacks came up to well over $151,000. That is a lot of money, much more than is typically taken during a bank robbery.
Police run the plates of the motorcycle and learn it will not help them ID the escaped suspect. The bike was stolen. FBI agents interview bank employees and customers, searching for clues that might help them locate the second gunman. But the robbers never used any names, and no one saw their faces. An evidence technician recovers a footprint left on the teller counter. But it is the only physical evidence investigators find at the scene. The heist was clean. Local police pull up the record of the dead robber, Daniel Del Fierro. He was fresh out of prison, having served time for manslaughter and assault. Police continue to hunt down Del Fierro's accomplice. Within hours of the robbery, they pick up his trail. Detectives respond to a nearby junkyard, where officers have recovered evidence.
We are backtracking, finding the items of evidence that were discarded. As he's running, he's getting rid of his motorcycle helmet he had on, gloves. It's sort of like the trail that he left behind. And he continues running probably another 50 feet. And he took off his jacket. There's a high chain link fence and barbed wire on top of that. There's also a handgun, a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol covered close to the jacket.
Investigators suspect that the gunman was covering his trail by leaving behind evidence and any clothing that would later identify him. But just as the suspect's trail appears to be getting cold, it heats up again.
Zero. I'll be right there. Gotta go.
Investigators head to a nearby apartment building, responding to a call made by the building's manager.
Excuse me, ma'am. You don't want to call the police earlier.
She had called police after finding fresh blood outside an apartment.
Anything unusual? Went upstairs to my apartment and noticed the blood on the stairwell.
Did you see any?
We surmised that the second suspect must have cut his hand going over the fence.
If it is the gunman's blood, he could still be in the building, armed and desperate. Police call for SWAT.
Secure the perimeter. We'll get you to a safe spot.
And a nearby team arrives immediately. With a dangerous and elusive gunman still on the loose, police hope they now have him cornered. Following a Seattle bank robbery in June 2000, a gun battle leaves one police officer injured and one suspect dead. A second armed suspect flees on foot and disappears. Police follow a blood trail to a nearby apartment building. Thinking the gunman might be holed up there, a SWAT team checks the place, one hallway, one apartment at a time.
Clear the top, come on!
But they find nothing. Once the building is cleared, investigators secure a sample of the blood for later testing. Authorities pour every resource into the intense manhunt, according to Detective Sergeant David Ritter.
Because of the seriousness of the robbery, every available officer that we could find was involved in this hunt for the second suspect.
Police are cautious, knowing from experience that someone willing to shoot a cop is far more dangerous than the average criminal. FBI agents approach residents, asking them what they've seen and warning them about the fugitive.
The suspect was obviously very dangerous, and the people in the immediate area were afraid.
Tactical officers continue to check buildings, alleys, any place the suspect could hide.
Clear, let's go, next one.
They instruct every business in a 15-block area to shut down and lock up.
Okay, all right, thanks.
In no time, authorities seal off one of Seattle's busiest shopping districts, bringing the entire area to a standstill. Investigators have identified the suspect killed during the shootout as Danny Del Fiero. He is the investigators' best lead for locating the second robber. King County Deputy Prosecutor Steve Fogg.
So we got an immediate warrant for his residence, his car, to try to locate whatever information we could about him, and through that, who he might have done the crime with.
At Del Fiero's home, investigators meet a woman who had lived with him. She says she knows nothing about the robbery, but helps them compile a list of her housemates' associates.
To solve a crime here. Man, listen, I understand you're uptight about it.
Investigators then search Del Fiero's home, but find nothing that can help them identify the escaped suspect. Across town, officers respond to a call from a man who claims he was the target of an attempted carjacking. It is just north of the building where the blood was found.
I was leaving for work, and
The driver explains that minutes earlier, he was leaving his apartment complex.
All of a sudden, he saw this guy jump out in front of him and slam both of his hands down on the hood and force him to stop. The guy said, "Hey, I've been in a fight, and I need you to help me. Can you give me a ride?"
Look, I need your car. Just come
The
on.
man became more aggressive.
He put his hand into the car, tried to grab the keys, and tried to take the car himself. When it became apparent that that was not going to work, he became quite vicious, within, a matter of seconds. The owner of the car was able to fight him off, push him out the door, and then just jet off as fast as he could. He reported what had happened to a police officer.
Yeah, the guy was like,
Police are convinced the carjacker is the robber they're pursuing. The victim gives them a detailed description of his assailant and the direction he was going.
He was moving to the north, so that moved the search in that direction. We got the description out immediately, and the media was helpful, and they got it out to the public. as fast as we had it.
For 3 hours, investigators find no sign of the fugitive until a 911 operator gets a call.
My wife and I, we've been mugged.
A man reports that he and his wife had been held hostage that afternoon. The intruder had fled, but they think he was the bank robber they heard about on the news.
Yes, the one that robbed the bank.
Investigators race to a residence north of the carjacking attempt. The couple explains what happened. 3 hours earlier, the woman was leaving her house when she saw a man in her truck. He was calm and told her he'd been in a fight and needed her help. She didn't fall for it.
At this point, the police and the media were sort of circling the area, and she pointed up to the helicopters and said, "No, I think actually they're looking for you." And again, the personality changed just like that. The woman is not somebody who's just going to kind of roll over for this guy.
She tried to fight back.
He grabbed a knife, let her know that he was capable of using it. He signaled to her that his own survival was at stake and he was going to be as brutal as he had to be.
Where's the tape? Tell me right now, where's the tape? Do you have any rope? Don't move.
As he searched for something with which to tie her up, her husband came home.
Honey! Honey! Where are you? Hey! I'm home. Honey, what's going on?
The husband then tried to intervene on behalf of his wife, and this guy punched him.
Stop moving! Stop moving! Give me your hands! Give me your hands!
At this point, they were just doing what they needed to do to survive, and so they said, I think they felt like if they were tied up, at least they wouldn't be shot or anything like that.
The couple could hear the assailant making calls on his cell phone in another room.
2434 Campbell Road. Knock on the window, okay?
Then he calmly got a beer from the refrigerator and began watching accounts of his own robbery on television. He seemed transfixed by live images of the extensive manhunt.
About 2.5, 3 hours after they were tied up, there was a knock on the window, and he sort of ran out the door, and that was the last they ever saw of him.
By the time police respond, it's clear the suspect has slipped through their dragnet.
Once we interviewed the people in the house, then it was pretty obvious that he had gotten away. The intensive search ended when it was obvious that he had fled the scene and he had had some help from somebody else, probably a car. So the actual physical search of the area was pretty much stopped at that time.
Investigators processed the entire house, collecting fingerprints and blood samples. They hope the evidence will help them identify a dangerous criminal. A man who will do anything to escape the law. An armed bank robber is on the run, following a deadly shootout in which police kill his partner. During his flight, the fugitive assaults a couple, then holds them hostage in their Seattle home, while he waits for a getaway driver to help him escape. FBI Special Agent Gary Shainline knows this fugitive is especially dangerous.
The nature of the act itself of bank robbery is very violent, but in trying to effect an escape, his partner and he were involved in the shooting of a police officer and also the taking hostage of innocent citizens. So the stakes in this particular case were definitely higher.
Detective Paul Seguro begins canvassing the neighbors of the slain robber, Danny Del Fiero. One man tells Seguro he had seen television reports about the stolen motorcycle used in the robbery, and he recognized it.
He saw Del Fiero with the motorcycle prior to the bank robbery taking place.
The man tells Seguro he saw the bike on a tow truck.
And this individual had seen another individual inside the truck with Del Fiero the day before.
Seguro thinks the tow truck driver might be the second robber. He asks the neighbor if he knows who he is. The man says he had never seen him before. The owners of the bank that was robbed tried to help, according to FBI Special Agent Mike Adams.
That very day, the bank came to us and wanted to offer a reward for information that would lead to the identity, arrest, and eventual conviction of the person or persons responsible for that armed bank robbery.
Agents hope the large reward will make people more willing to talk.
Myself, other FBI agents spent many long hours attempting to gather as much information as we could.
Investigators tracked down every possible lead, trying to get more information on Del Fierro's known associates.
We drove to several different addresses and locations in our attempt to interview different people who we thought might be able to lead to the identity as well as the location of the second suspect of this bank robbery.
Every lead becomes a dead end. Investigators finally get a break when officers begin processing the evidence left behind by the fleeing robber.
Inside the jacket was this piece of paper that had a photocopy of a driver's license that belonged to a young 16-year-old girl, and then a lot of information about who she was.
Police begin looking for the young woman.
They called the best number they had for her, which was her dad. And her dad said, well, she's at the movies. And they said, well, you need to get her. So she came and talked to the police, and she said that as soon as her dad came into the movie theater, she immediately knew what it was about.
Basically, the reason why I asked is because
they show her the photocopied license and ask how the bank robbers got it.
I really would hate to see.
She told us that she was approached by a person she went to high school with. The person she went to high school with said, I have an individual that has large sums of money. He needs ID and social security numbers. In return, you'll get a couple $1,000s if you let us use your ID and social security number.
The young woman explains the information was to be used to set up bank accounts, to launder stolen money. She gives detectives the name of her high school friend, the middleman for the ID fraud.
So what is this all about?
Detectives track down the man and try to get him to cooperate.
We contacted him early morning hours. He was somewhat reluctant to talk to us at first, but then as we started talking to him, he finally started to tell us about who it was that asked him to obtain the identification and social security numbers.
His name is Aristotle.
He tells detectives the man's name is Aristotle Marr.
We then thought that it's very possible that Aristotle Marr is the person we're looking for, because he was obviously looking for a way to launder money in the hopes of getting legitimate funds in return.
Investigators are convinced they're on the right track when the middleman tells investigators that Marr owns a towing service. Police conduct a background check. DMV records reveal that there is a tow truck registered to Marr, and that it matches the one described by Del Fierro's neighbor. Investigators return to Del Fierro's home to ask his old roommate if she knows Aristotle Marr. She says Marr and Del Fierro had been friends since childhood.
So now his name has come up in two different sources or two different ways during the investigation. So now we started to focus on Aristotle Marr as being the second suspect involved in the bank robbery.
Authorities check Marr's police record. It's clean, except for one assault charge he received as a minor. Tax records show Marr runs a successful towing business and already owns property worth $400,000. Police are surprised to learn he was a star athlete in high school, graduating 6 years earlier with a 4.0 grade point average.
The first thing everybody said about him was how smart he was. And you could see he had a lot of potential in life, but was impatient enough. And I think that that fed directly into the greed that motivated these crimes.
Steve Fogg subpoenas the cell phone records of Marr and Del Fierro. He discovers calls made between the two suspects prior to the robbery, circumstantial evidence that they were possibly in the planning stages.
Danny Del Fiero and Aristotle Marr were talking, 10 times an hour in the days and weeks that preceded this.
Police then ask witnesses to confirm Marr's identity. To do this, they create a photo montage.
Typically, what happens is you have 6 photos, and the person who's the suspect is one of the 6. Here, the police put together a 12-person montage. They really went the extra mile just to make absolutely certain that we had the right guy.
Authorities show the photo montage to the woman who was assaulted and held hostage in her home.
And she didn't have any hesitation at all. She picked out Mr. Marr immediately.
Later, her husband and the carjacking victim would also pick out Marr as their attacker.
So with that, taken together with all the circumstantial evidence, we were quite confident that Aristotle Marr was the guy we were looking for.
Let's go. Authorities secure an arrest warrant for Marr and a search warrant for his home. Knowing Marr's volatile tendencies, police prepare for what could be a violent confrontation. On June 22, 2000, a pair of alleged serial bank robbers hit another Seattle bank. During a shootout with police, one bandit is killed, and the other escapes. The dead robber is Daniel Del Fiero. Authorities believe the fugitive is Aristotle Marr. Fearing a violent confrontation, police prepare to serve arrest and search warrants with the help of a tactical unit. With the team are homicide detectives Paul Seguro and David Ritter.
When we went to the residence, we had members of the SWAT team, multiple Seattle police units to assist us in securing the premise.
Room by room, SWAT searches the house. They find no sign of Marr. Homicide detective Paul Seguro.
Once the home is secured, myself and the rest of the homicide unit went in and started searching through the home.
Something real quick.
They look for any evidence that can tie Marr to the robbery or provide a clue to his whereabouts. In a hidden storage area, they find remnants of an arsenal.
Look at that. There it is. Look at that.
Detectives recover empty containers for various types of handguns.
I can reach for that second.
Although they do find a few weapons, most of the guns are gone.
There was different types of ammunition for long guns, shotguns. There was ammunition for handguns.
Detectives begin looking at the bullets more closely and uncover an important piece of evidence.
We found ammunition that matched ammunition that we found at the scene of the bank robbery.
Authorities also discover another lead. Documents that show frequent travel to and from Jamaica by Marr and several associates.
Also, there was small photographs and templates for the making of what appeared to be false identification.
Investigators suspect that Marr may have plans to flee the country under a false name. During the search at Marr's home, authorities discover a second house on the property.
Excuse me, Bob. We need that house cleared over there.
Agents immediately file a search warrant for the place and set up surveillance while they wait for the warrant to be processed. For a week, authorities watch people come and go, but see no sign of the robbery suspect. When a judge finally issues the warrant, SWAT goes in. What they find spins the investigation in another direction. The building is a storage unit for stolen goods.
We found numerous boxes, brand new appliances, riding lawnmowers that were brand new, refrigerators, numerous cellular phones, and just all kinds of items that were still intact, brand new, still in the box.
Investigators find packing lists still attached to the items, indicating they came from local home improvement stores.
It was obvious to us that Aristotle Marr was involved in a bigger criminal enterprise than just bank robberies.
The items were large. There were appliances, there were pallets of windows, big things, stuff that somebody doesn't go in and shoplift. I mean, these were big items and showed that there had to be some pretty sophisticated means to obtain this property. It was obvious that we needed help from our burglary and theft people. They coordinated the recovery of the property.
The Burglary and Theft Division work with representatives from the local stores to identify more than $100,000 worth of stolen goods.
Representatives provided a big, large moving van, and all the items that were identified as being stolen or suspicious were then loaded in the back of the moving van and taken off property.
Investigators suspect that Marr must have had help obtaining and selling the items.
We believe a lot of the stolen property was sent to Jamaica. There just was some indication, some receipts, shipping receipts, etc., that showed a large amount of household goods going to Jamaica.
Authorities intensify their search for the alleged crime ringleader, Aristotle Marr. The Seattle FBI's Fugitive Task Force takes the lead. Special Agent Gary Shainline.
Well, we started with the fundamentals by contacting his family and associates in the hopes of finding that person that could give us the information that would lead to a safe and swift apprehension.
But every person agents interview claims no knowledge of Marr's whereabouts. Within weeks, the search for Marr begins to take its toll on the fugitive. In an unexpected, bold move, a group of Marr supporters, including his lawyer, holds a press conference proclaiming his innocence. They charge police have falsely accused him because of his association with Daniel Del Fierro. Agents speak with lawyers about arranging surrender, but instead hear a preposterous claim.
We tried to have him turn himself in a safe manner, in a controlled environment, and they said that he was, afraid that he was going to be, killed by the local police.
Marr remains a fugitive. The FBI takes a new approach. They seek the help of a national television crime show, advertising a $25,000 reward for information leading to Marr's arrest. The tips pour in. One caller claims he's been in contact with Marr through a popular web-based instant messaging system. Agents subpoena the internet provider for details on the instant messaging account and receive transcripts of the online conversations.
Through the content of the dialogue on the instant messaging communication, it was logical to believe that one of the participants was Aristotle Marr.
The company provides agents with the address of the computer used.
We approached it with the belief that it was possible that Marr could be there at that time.
Armed with a search warrant, they confront a man who they recognize as a known associate of Marr.
Sure? Yeah, I'm sure, sir.
He says Marr isn't there.
No?
Agents conduct a thorough search for any evidence that could prove the fugitive had been in the apartment, but they find nothing. Agents confiscate the computer in question. They eventually determined that Marr had probably never used the computer, that it had been the associate pretending to be Marr on the instant messaging system.
You ready?
The investigators' latest lead is a dead end.
That search really didn't glean any further information regarding Aristotle's whereabouts.
The FBI continues surveillance at the houses of family and friends, but soon realize Marr may never return.
Unlike your garden variety bank robber, Aristotle Marr did have some financial means. He had owned property at a rental house, and I'm sure that those assets and those means, helped him in his fugitive status.
An informant calls the FBI with a tip that appears to support what agents already fear.
A confidential source indicated that he had fled under an alias, that he had not just crossed the state line, but actually had fled the country, and that he had fled to Jamaica.
If Marr has indeed left the country under another name, he might be impossible to find. The FBI is now facing their toughest obstacle in a case that appears impossible to crack. The FBI continues to hunt for bank robbery suspect Aristotle Marr. They believe he fled to Jamaica under an assumed name. But the FBI cannot simply go after him, according to Special Agent Gary Shainline.
We don't have any police authority in other countries, so there are FBI representatives and there's U.S. Marshals in Jamaica that liaise with Jamaican authorities, and I was providing them with all the information that we were gleaning from our investigation here, giving them names and points of contact, possible locations that were worthy of investigation in Jamaica in the pursuit of Marr.
Investigating Marr's whereabouts in Jamaica is difficult. He's well connected on the island and has a lot of money to help him disappear.
We're confident that through those resources that he was able to maintain a low profile and have different places to go to hide himself.
Informants report occasional sightings of the fugitive, but he eludes capture. Agents believe he is moving from house to house under cover of night, supported by a loyal group of associates. Following the leads from agents in the United States, authorities in Jamaica relentlessly pursue the fugitive. They contact every known associate of Aristotle Marr. They are uncooperative, but authorities keep them under surveillance.
It's Aristotle Marr.
The marshals were watching everything they did down in Jamaica. They made it very clear that they were not going to go away until Mr. Marr returned to the United States and answered to these charges.
In Seattle, King County Deputy Prosecutor Steve Fogg decides to file several charges against the fugitive, based on the abundance of circumstantial evidence already in hand.
We charged him with an array of counts that reflected the full nature of this crime spree. We charged him with robbery in the first degree with the firearm enhancement because he was armed when that happened. We charged him as an accomplice with Danny Del Fiero to the shooting of Officer Buxton. We charged him with attempt robbery 2, which is a formal way of saying attempted carjacking. And then kidnappings because they were essentially kidnapped and held hostage in their own basement.
Steve Fogg also suspects Marr is involved in an international theft ring, but decides not to press charges.
Mr. Marr was already looking at so much time that the amount of additional time that would be added by this theft ring would be negligible. I mean, you're talking about a year or two on a guy who's looking at, 30, 40, 50 years in prison. So we did not charge Mr. Marr for that.
Authorities intensify their search for Marr. Seattle homicide detective David Ritter.
We kept the pressure up.
Give me a break, please.
I mean, they felt our presence. They made several complaints that we were harassing them, but we weren't. We were conducting an investigation of a very violent crime, and we wanted to solve it. We wanted him in custody. It got the whole situation probably too hot for him. He wasn't having much fun anymore.
After 7 months, the constant pressure pays off. On February 7th, 2001, Aristotle Marr shocks police, walking into the King County Jail with his lawyer.
Just go up to the counter, put your hands where I can see them.
Seattle Police Detective Paul Seguro had chased Marr from the beginning.
Sergeant Christopher, this is Tebow down at the watch desk. Aristotle Marr just turned himself in.
I was surprised that Aristotle Marr actually took it upon himself to turn himself in. We tried to talk to Aristotle Marr, interview him about the robberies, where he'd been. He did not wish to talk about any aspects of the investigation at all.
Authorities believe he has come back to take the pressure off his associates, and because he is sure the charges will never stick.
He was quite confident, in fact, probably cocky, that this would be a case that he could beat in court. He could come back, beat this case, and kill two birds with one stone.
At his arraignment, Marr pleads not guilty to all charges.
One advantage that Mr. Marr had by fleeing was he could sit back and watch our case develop, and I had no doubt that he'd have an explanation for all the evidence, and we would have a real fight on our hands at trial.
Marr's defense team knows that lab examiners have found his fingerprints on items dropped outside the bank, including the motorcycle helmet and a pair of gloves. They explain the prints by claiming Marr lent the items to Daniel Del Fierro, the suspect killed in the shootout.
What Mr. Marr didn't know about, but we of course knew about, was this blood trail that had been left. I knew that the next step was to get an immediate sample of his blood, and I knew that that would definitely be the silver bullet if we were able to develop DNA information from the blood trail that was left.
A judge orders Marr to submit the samples, which DNA experts compare to blood found at the apartment complex and inside the kidnapped couple's house and truck. The examiner reports a match.
At that point, any concern we had about the outcome of that case definitely lifted, because it was clear that, taken together with all the other evidence that we already had, that this was a rock-solid case.
Marr decides not to risk a jury trial and changes his plea to guilty. He is sentenced to 23 years in prison with no chance of parole. Seattle police officer Wesley Buxton, shot during his confrontation with Marr and Del Fierro, is relieved that Marr finally got what he deserved.
I'm probably your typical police officer that feels that criminals should get much more than they actually get as far as the demands of justice. But I was fairly satisfied with the sentence.
Special Agent Mike Adams.
Given the high number of bank robberies we have every year, on average, well over 300 bank robberies here in the state of Washington, it's a good feeling when we can bring about, or at least help bring about, a successful conclusion to such a high-profile bank robbery investigation.
In the end, it was the combined efforts of the Seattle Police Department and the FBI that finally put Aristotle Marr out of business. In a world where money is everything and life means nothing, a drug gang stalks the streets of Chicago. They are heavily armed, well-funded, and have dangerous international contacts. It will take every weapon in the FBI's arsenal to stop a deadly threat known as the El Rukins.
In the 1980s, the drug trade ravaged Chicago's inner-city neighborhoods. Heroin and cocaine sales soared. Violent crime threatened to destroy the community. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As drug profits grew, gangs ruled the streets. One of the most dangerous was called El Rukin. Agents teamed up with state and local police to bring them down, but in the process, uncovered a bizarre and frightening terrorist plot.
Chicago, Illinois. In the early 1980s, it is one of the deadliest major cities in America. Powerful drug gangs have transformed the South Side from a neighborhood into a war zone. To combat the rising tide of violence, the FBI forms the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. In Chicago, their prime target is a vicious gang known as the El Rukns. John Podliska is an assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago.
The business of the El Rukns was to traffic in narcotics, cocaine and heroin, and to control a vast area on the south side of Chicago for purposes of selling and distributing those narcotics. They would exact tribute from other people who would want to sell in that area, and they had a reputation, and a well-deserved reputation, for being one of, if not the most successful and the most violent criminal drug-dealing organizations in the Chicago area.
In the spring of 1985, several members split from the gang. They try to move in on El Rukn territory. Revenge is swift and deadly. Chicago's South Side is gripped by a vicious turf war. As the murder rate climbs, the FBI seems powerless to stop the violence. Then, in May, an informant gives agents a tip. Several members of the El Rukn gang have left Chicago. They are hiding out in a house in Cleveland. Many of them are wanted for murder. FBI agents and Cleveland police raid the house and arrest several suspects. One of them is a man named Anthony Sumner. Sumner is a former El Rukn general, which makes him potentially useful. If investigators can turn him, they can get intelligence on the secret of El Rukns.
Sumner, how you doing?
Detectives question Sumner for hours. He implicates himself in a double homicide in Chicago and is facing serious time. Authorities offer to reduce charges, but only if Sumner tells them everything he knows about the El Rukns. Finally, the former El Rukn general agrees to cooperate. As Sumner talks to authorities, a terrifying picture emerges. The El Rukn gang has hundreds of members. They're heavily armed, they're well organized, and they're growing. The entire organization is run by Jeff Fort, a kingpin known for his efficiency and his brutality.
He was at the top, controlling the entire organization. Directly below him were 21 generals, and he preserved his power that way. If anyone tried to seize power from him, from amongst those 21 generals, there were 20 other people who would be in a position to let him know that, and he could retaliate.
Authorities thought they had taken Ford out of commission. In 1983, he was convicted of cocaine trafficking and sentenced to 13 years in a Texas prison. According to Sumner, Jeff Fort continues to run the El Rukns. He uses the prison payphones to contact his gang in Chicago. Sumner's statement is a major break in the El Rukn case, according to Assistant U.S. Attorney Patrick Deedy.
He was the first person to actually confirm what the authorities had thought for a long time, which was that Jeff Fort, who was currently in penitentiary in Texas, was regularly talking on the telephone to members of the El Rukns in Chicago and coordinating or directing activities of the organization.
The El Rukns run their operation out of a converted movie theater on the south side of Chicago.
It had been fortified by the El Rukns and was essentially a fortified fortress. He had people at the headquarters of the El Rukns who were required to sit by that phone 24 hours a day. There was always someone at the phone so that when he called, he could give his instructions, directions, and orders as to what he wanted done with his organization.
For the task force, Jeff Fort's telephone conversations are an opportunity to learn more about the organization.
Yes, Imam.
No one questioned what he said and what he wanted done. There was absolutely no debate, discussion, objection to anything that he was saying.
And so the FBI over the summer 1985 began to develop evidence to provide a sufficient probable cause to go and to begin to listen to these conversations.
Agents activate a 24-hour wiretap to record the Kingpin's phone calls. Tom Coram is a former special agent with the FBI. In 1985, he is assigned to the Drug Task Force and the El Rukin case.
The technicians installed the wiretap equipment through the telephone company. Nothing was actually installed at the prison. We did all of our monitoring. In fact, in Austin, Texas, which was 40 to 50 miles away from Bastrop, Texas, where the prison was located. We were really stunned when we started hearing the conversation from Fort, because he was speaking with key gang leaders in Chicago, and what we were hearing was just strings of words.
Jeff Fort and his gang are talking in code.
And the kinds of series of words that we would hear said would be things like, in the science of Taku, love, truth, perfect man. And we had no idea what these words meant. And we couldn't establish any form of reference to figure out what he was saying during these conversations.
Agents believe that Fort and the El Rukins are discussing drug deals.
Okay.
But until they crack the gang's code, they can't prove a thing.
One of the Chicago police officers came up with really a very good idea. The Chicago Police Department had uniformed officers almost on a daily basis make some sort of contact with the El Rukin gang members just to let them know that the Chicago Police Department was in the neighborhood and that they were being watched. And so the Chicago detective came up with the idea of having one of the uniformed officers go up to the gang headquarters, speak to one of the gang leaders while Jeff Fort was on the telephone, and see if the gang members would encode what the police officer had said to the gang member and then feed it back to Jeff Fort in the coded form. And what we heard was the gang member come back up to the telephone where Jeff Fort was on the phone at the time and then encode that statement that had been made to him by the police officer. So at that point we learned the code words for one, the word for pound, and the word for marijuana.
Now what about?
And the word for marijuana we found out at that time was perfect man.
Again?
Breaking the El Rukin code is slow, painstaking work. After 2 months, agents only know a fraction of the gang's business.
We realized that we were missing a lot of the calls that were being made from other phones at the El Rukin headquarters in Chicago. So we knew that the operation that we were running in Texas needed to be concluded, and we needed to set operations back up in Chicago and begin monitoring all of the phones inside the gang headquarters in order to get the whole story.
In December, Agent Coram and his team decide to move the wiretap operation to Chicago. They establish a new listening post near El Rukin headquarters. As authorities activate the new wiretap, they encounter a familiar problem.
When we turned the wire on in Chicago, I found that once again I was hearing words that I didn't understand.
The El Rukin gang is using a new code. They may have found out the FBI was listening. Once again, Agent Corum can't understand what they're saying.
It was like we had to start all over again when I thought we would be able to pick up where we left off when we shut the operation down in Texas.
Hour after hour, Corum listens to the recordings. He slowly pieces together phrases.
He's talked about New York.
Something is different. Something has changed.
Some of the words I started picking up were words like up. I started hearing words that related to travel, and there hadn't been any words that related to travel during the Texas operation. I started hearing references to New York, and I eventually heard a reference to Libya that really caused me to be really, really concerned about what changes had occurred during the 3 or 4 months that we had not been monitoring the telephones.
It's a chilling discovery. Libya, a rogue nation in North Africa, is suspected of state-sponsored terrorism. A well-armed drug gang, combined with foreign terrorists, could pose a deadly threat to national security. In Chicago, an FBI wiretap reveals that Jeff Fort continues to run the El Rukin gang from prison.
Bring it all back to me.
Although the gang talks in code, authorities learn they are discussing Libya, a country suspected of terrorism. Investigators of the Chicago Drug Task Force spend hours listening to the recorded conversations. To Special Agent Tom Corum, it doesn't make sense. Why is a Chicago drug gang talking about Libya?
I went back to the beginning and started listening to the conversations again, and I started piecing the bits and pieces of the conversation together and came to the conclusion that they were talking about having met with someone in Libya who was going to provide them with money for destroying an airplane here in the United States.
Corum alerts the U.S. Attorney's Office. The drug investigation has uncovered a potential terrorist plot. The FBI calls in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Special Agent Ned Hamara is assigned to the Terrorism Task Force in Chicago.
We took it seriously because we had no idea whether it was real or not. It was decided that the Terrorism Task Force take over the wire and continue an investigation to determine what, if anything, was going on. The Drug Task Force offered their agents to help with overhearing the wire talk and recorded conversations.
If authorities hope to unravel El Rukin's plans, they need to decipher the new code quickly and completely.
This is a conversation. At that time, we took our surveillance teams and put them to work.
Fred Wheat is a lieutenant with the Chicago Police Department. His specialty is surveillance. In 1985, Wheat is assigned to the FBI's Terrorism Task Force.
We were brought in because they knew that they would need surveillance, and also that a number of the Chicago police officers had worked El Rukin's before and would be helpful in setting up the strategy to work this organization.
The surveillance team's job is to make physical observations that can be compared to the information agents are hearing on the wiretap.
We basically had round-the-clock surveillance on different members of the group who were involved with the conversations with Jeff Fort. We were watching those members and just trying to follow their activities. On one instance, one of the gang members reads a newspaper article to Jeff Fort and substitutes the code word for the actual newsprint. So, I mean, we had a verbatim interpretation of some of those code words because He describes an incident on the south side of Chicago where there was a shooting involving a landlord and a neighbor of some sort. And so we were able to take those code words and go back to previous conversations, insert them into conversations, which solved a lot of our deciphering of some coded conversations.
Okay. Now that's it.
Slowly, agents crack the new code. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI's Chicago field office.
The calls that are being intercepted at the El Rucan headquarters basically concern two areas. They concern the El Rucan's normal business of engaging in drug transactions, as well as what we are beginning to realize is a plot between the El Rucans and the government of Libya.
How'd it go?
Knowing the violent history of this particular organization, we were afraid that the El Rucans were going to commit an act of terrorism in the United States in order to obtain money from the Libyan government.
From the wiretap, authorities learned that several members of the El Rucan gang recently traveled to Libya. As agents continue to monitor the gang's conversations, the situation with Libya deteriorates. On April 2nd, 1986, a bomb detonates aboard TWA Flight 840 between Rome and Athens. 4 Americans are killed. 9 are injured. The FBI suspects the government of Libya and President Muammar Gaddafi are responsible for the carnage.
On April 4th of 1986, there was a series of conversations between Jeff Fort and a general in the El Rucan organization known as Melvin Mays. And they discussed this explosion on this flight between Rome and Greece. And Mays, at one point in the conversation, indicates that their group would be able to do something like that within 30 to 50 days.
Yeah. It is a terrifying prospect.
I want you to take a video.
Via the decoded wiretap, the task force listens in on Fort's plans. The gang leader wants 2 of his generals, Leon McAnderson and Rico Cranshaw, to make another trip to Libya.
Fort was really concerned about how are we going to convince the Libyans, that we're an organization that can do something for them. One of the things that we were able to determine, he talked about getting newspaper clippings to take back over there to show the Libyans that this is what we've been doing, this is what we can do. Violent things that happen that the El Rucans are responsible for. The whole idea was to convince the Libyans that the El Rucans were an organization big enough to commit some significant terrorist activity or acts in the United States on their behalf. We believed it was a real threat.
If McAnderson and Cranshaw return to Libya, federal agents will not be far behind. In Chicago, FBI agents and police wiretap the El Rucan gang. 2 of Jeff Fort's generals are planning a trip overseas to convince Libyan officials that El Rucan can perform terrorist acts within the United States. Travel restrictions to Libya make the trip impossible. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
The United States had just engaged in at least 2 military actions against the Libyans, and the El Rucans knew that the Libyans were under scrutiny from the United States government. The El Rucans, as well as the Libyans, felt that the safest place for them to meet would be in Panama, which they called the Straw Hat. That was their particular code word for Panama.
Cranshaw and McAnderson, 2 high-ranking El Rucan generals, will make the trip to Panama City. The task force needs surveillance on both men from the moment they leave Chicago until they return. On May 3rd, Cranshaw and McAnderson leave El Rukin headquarters. A surveillance team is not far behind. The El Rukins board a jet in Chicago, bound for Miami. From there, they fly to Panama. In Panama, Cranshaw and McAnderson are seen entering the Libyan embassy, presumably to meet with government officials. And on May 10th, the two El Rukins returned to the United States.
We knew when they were coming back, and we worked with our colleagues at U.S. Customs and asked them to do a search of these individuals when they arrived in Miami.
They found a document in Rico Crenshaw's luggage, which they photographed. Crenshaw and McAnderson were not aware that this was happening, but the document was in Crenshaw's handwriting.
Basically, they had written a letter that said that they had 5-man cells in cities throughout the United States and that they were interested in trying to destabilize the government.
The next day, on May 11th, the task force intercepts several telephone conversations between the two El Rukins and their leader, Jeff Fort. Cranshaw and McAnderson tell Fort the Libyans have agreed to provide financing. They will deposit the money in a Panamanian bank in the United States. An attorney they met in Panama will contact them shortly. For the task force, it's a terrifying development. But agents don't have enough evidence to prosecute the El Rukin gang on conspiracy charges.
In order for the FBI to establish that a crime has been committed, we must collect enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the conspiracy had actually taken place and that there was an intended goal of the conspiracy. And we had to prove that there was a serious plan to commit an act of terrorism here in the United States.
Agents continue to listen to the wiretap, hoping to learn more.
During June, Fort talks about sending El Rukins over to Libya to learn bomb-making skills. He said we can send some of the soldiers or members over there. They could learn how to make bombs. Those individuals can come back to the United States and teach other members how to make bombs.
As alarming as this scenario is, it's still not enough to prove a conspiracy. Weeks go by. The money from the Libyans never shows up. Fort panics. He will do anything to make the deal.
In late June, early July, Fort became, he just saw that the money was not going to be coming from the Libyans and that he had to do something, or the El Rukins had to do something to show the Libyans, that they were somebody to respect. He talked about damaging a government building. He talked about planting bombs. He talked about blowing up an airplane. And he talked about getting a rocket, one that you can use once and throw away. So we figured, okay, how can we address this issue?
Through the wiretaps we're hearing.
Fort wants to buy military-grade weapons. The task force decides to use it to their advantage by becoming El Rukin's sole supplier.
Okay.
So enter Special Agent Willie Hulon. Willie was on the drug task force. He had already made one drug buy with Alan Knox through an FBI cooperating source.
Alan Knox is a high-ranking El Rukin. Agents assume he is aware of Fort's plans.
So we figured that we'd set up another drug buy with Alan Knox, and at which point Special Agent Hulan could introduce the idea that he had a weapons contact and so on, and that they might be able to supply the Alrukans or somebody else with weapons or any military equipment.
He mentions that he has a friend who works at a military base, a friend who can steal weapons. Knox is interested.
Willie Hulan is an amazing individual. He's cool, calm, collected, works well under pressure. He was ideal for this situation. His knowledge of the street gangs, his calmness and operating sources, and Willie was perfect for this role.
Knox tells Hulan about the kind of weapons the gang wants to buy.
They were interested in grenade launchers, and so when he described the grenade launchers, he said it's the type that Clint Eastwood used in the movie, which obviously is a law rocket.
The M72 Law rocket is the U.S. Army's primary light anti-tank weapon. The shoulder-launched missile can penetrate a foot of armor at a range of over 200 meters. It can destroy a tank, a building, or even a low-flying airliner. Agents cannot allow El Rukan to obtain such a deadly weapon on the open market. But the development does offer unique opportunities.
We decided that why not we supply, or the FBI supply, the Alrukans with a rocket.
Special Agent Willie Hulan negotiates with Alan Knox on the price.
You guys doing all right? Thank you. Yeah.
He tells Knox he can get Law rockets for $1,850 apiece.
Got a man on the inside.
Obviously, we weren't going to sell these guys a law rocket that they could use or would even work. But that being said, we wanted to sell them a device that looked like a real law rocket, and on a cursory inspection would appear to them to be a real law rocket.
And they will buy for that $2,200.
The ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, constructs a dummy law rocket. Although it looks like the real thing, it does not contain an explosive charge. The ATF also installs a radio transmitter so agents can track the device from a distance. The inert rocket is ready. The trap is set. On July 29th, the task force launches the operation.
Take out an aircraft. Tracking device.
On July 29th, 1986, the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force launches a complex sting operation. Agents will attempt to sell a dummy law rocket to the El Rukans, a gang of vicious drug dealers who are willing to sell out their own country to Libyan terrorists. Gang leader Jeff Fort takes the bait. He tells Alan Knox to set up the buy.
And we're hearing this on the wiretap after the meeting, so we know that it's going to go forward. The arrangements which were basically given to us by the Alrukans was we were going to meet them where the transaction was going to occur.
The task force meets to plan the sting operation. The sale of the law rocket will go down at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois, 30 miles from Chicago.
Normally, we would have never conducted an undercover investigation like this because of the extreme danger to Agent Hulan. But the fact that we knew that the Alrukans were dealing with the Libyans, we had to weigh those risks and ultimately decided that we could do it safely, that we could make the transaction safely and protect the life of our undercover agent.
Surveillance teams will form the outer perimeter, 4 blocks from the hotel.
Like I said, ultimately,
SWAT and undercover teams will form an inner perimeter, stationed in and around the hotel.
What's going to happen when our operation? At this point, we have the north, south.
On July 31st, agents from the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, and the Chicago Police Department deployed to the hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They cannot fail. The lives of hundreds and possibly thousands of people are at stake.
On the night of the Law Rocket deal, we probably had in excess of 50 individuals spread out through different areas.
Surveillance teams assigned to the outer perimeter get into position. At 6:30 p.m., a car enters the perimeter. There are 2 men inside. Agents are unable to identify either one of them. Detective Wheat's surveillance team picks up the incoming vehicle. He follows it to a gas station nearby. At the gas station, Wheat is able to make a positive ID. Melvin Mays is the driver. Alan Knox is in the passenger seat.
Moments after Melvin had departed the gas station, we saw him go in toward the inner perimeter. We passed on the plate number of the vehicle, the color of the vehicle, the make of the vehicle, all pertinent information that would help us keep this vehicle under surveillance.
At the hotel, task force members get into position.
We had a complement of SWAT, other surveillance people, other case agents in adjacent rooms, down hallways, different floors. Everything to control that situation. We didn't want people from another floor coming up. We didn't want to have citizens who weren't a part of this deal getting caught in the crossfire if that happened. The outer teams were prepared to move in to help secure this area in the event that things went wrong, so that it was plenty of firepower there on hand to deal with any situation that might develop.
Mays and Knox arrive at the hotel within minutes. The sale is about to go down. The task force is ready. They know the El Rukns are willing to do whatever it takes to fulfill Jeff Fort's orders and make the buy. On the night of July 31st, 1986, 2 members of the El Rukn gang arrive at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They have arranged to purchase a light anti-tank rocket. Their goal, to prove to the Libyan government that the El Rukns can operate as terrorists for hire. They have no idea that the man they are dealing with is an undercover FBI agent. Members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force can hear every word of the transaction. Detective Fred Wheat and his surveillance team is stationed 4 blocks from the hotel.
We heard a knock on the door. We could actually hear the physical knock. We heard some voices and someone asked who it was, etc. He was admitted into the room. We could hear them negotiate or talk about the sale of the rocket.
To launch. A little something extra I threw in.
You can't see the rocket launcher. Where's it at?
It's on the photo. You know I don't do business like that. Where's the cash?
It's close.
You get your launcher when I get my cash.
A few minutes later, Melvin Mays leaves the hotel. He needs to get final confirmation from gang leader Jeff Fort before the sale can be completed. Mays returns to El Rucan headquarters to wait for Fort's call.
Jeff Fort controlled every aspect of the El Rucan organization, to include this transaction.
The wiretap picks up the phone call between Mays and Jeff Fort. Fort seems leery about the buy. He's worried that it's a setup. Fort instructs Mays to bring a young gang member back with him. They should arrive at the hotel in separate cars. If the buy is a setup, Jeff Fort would rather sacrifice a low-level gang member than risk one of his generals.
In other words, Fort did not want any contact or any trading of money between the undercover agents who he suspected and his generals.
Fort orders him to deliver the money to the hotel and then pick up the law rocket. The sale goes off without a hitch.
What you think? Maybe, sir. Still out there, right? Buddy doing business with you?
The El Rucans have no idea that the law rocket is a dummy. The low-level El Rucan takes off in the direction of Chicago. Surveillance units follow him onto the Dan Ryan Expressway.
At that point, we had surveillance behind them, in front of them, on the side of them, down the expressway, coming on at certain exits, getting off at certain exits.
Suddenly, the young gang member transporting the law rocket pulls over and stops. Seconds later, another vehicle pulls alongside him. It's Melvin Mays.
What are you doing? Stop.
As it turns out, the gang member's car has broken down. The law rocket is transferred to Mays' car.
Get back in your car.
We would not have known that it changed from one vehicle to the other or one person to the other unless we had a physical eye on that transaction.
The law rocket had been equipped with a radio transmitter, and we were using electronic equipment and physical surveillance to follow the rocket back to where they eventually stored it.
Mays drives to an apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue, a few miles from El Rucan headquarters. The gang members refer to this building as the Armory.
Then our job really began, because at that point we were 24/7 on that location, because we had to make sure that that law rocket was not moved.
Special Agent Ned Hamara continues to monitor the wiretap.
A couple days went by. Fort's fears were allayed that they weren't police, and in subsequent conversations, he says, okay, let's buy 5 more. You know, we want 5 more, and we're going to test one.
Task force members are worried. Fort has chosen a target to prove his terrorist capabilities. He intends to kill a Chicago police detective.
The detective who was kind of, he worked for the Gang Crimes Chicago Police Department, who was kind of a thorn for many years in the El Rucan side. They hated him, and they figured, okay, we're going to buy some rockets, but we're going to use one, and we're going to test it on him.
Gentlemen, according to the wiretap,
The attorneys and the agents all made a decision, okay, let's take it down now. Let's not wait any further, because we figured if they tried to test the law rocket, they're going to determine that it's a dummy rocket, and it's going to blow a lot of people's cover.
The FBI makes a dangerous call. It's time to take down the El Rucan gang and put Jeff Fort behind bars forever. The FBI has the El Rucan gang on the hook. They have surveillance photos and wiretaps of the gang purchasing a dummy law rocket. From his prison in Texas, gang leader Jeff Fort instructs the El Rucans to buy 5 more rockets. He wants to test fire one of them to prove that his gang can perform terrorist hits for hire.
We had to prevent the El Rucans from actually doing something to try to impress the Libyans. We felt it prudent at that time that we'd gone along far enough, we had enough evidence to at least put them behind bars for at least weapon charges, if not the terrorist activities. We weren't going to take the chances that they were going to get a law rocket from an outside source and use it.
A live law rocket in the hands of a violent gang like the El Rucans would be catastrophic.
I think everybody decided it was time to take it down.
On the morning of August 5th, the task force launches simultaneous raids on El Rucan headquarters and on the apartment building they call the Armory.
That building at 39th and Drexel was a fortified fort. It had steel doors on both the front and rear and iron gates across the other doors. We had to use a burning bar that day to gain entry into the fort to execute our search warrant.
Go, 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 go!
We went from surveillance officers to search and control officers. We began systematically arresting across the city all individuals that were involved in this plot.
In an office at El Rucan headquarters, authorities find travel itineraries to Libya for Rico Cranshaw and Leon McAnderson. The second arrest team raids the apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue.
I was at the location on South Kenwood. Our main objective was to find the law rocket. We're walking all through the complex, you know, behind the ATF agent who's got the beacon, and he's going upstairs and downstairs and all around. Oh, it's getting fader, we're getting stronger. We were in there for, you know, it seemed like a half hour, and we're walking and we're still not getting it. Finally, we go down into the basement. And this is a rat-infested, roach-infested location. But when we're going down the stairs, it gets louder and louder and louder.
It's getting stronger right down here.
Finally, we decided it's got to be under the stairwell. So we ripped open the stairwell, and sure enough, the law rocket was there, along with about 35 other assortment of automatic weapons that we discovered. Most of them were submachine guns. Who knows, how many weapons were used in crimes or murders or what. The main thing, we got the law rocket back before they were able to determine that it, was an inert or dummy law rocket.
Hands up! Hands up! Hands up! Hands up!
McAnderson and Cranshaw are arrested without incident. Alan Knox is also taken into custody. Melvin Mays is nowhere to be found. On October 30th, 1986, Jeff Fort, Alan Knox, Rico Cranshaw, and Leon McAnderson are indicted on charges of conspiracy, possession of weapons, and use of interstate facilities to carry on unlawful activities. Melvin Mays, who is still a fugitive, is placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. In 1987, McAnderson and Cranshaw are convicted and sentenced to more than 50 years in prison. Melvin Mays eludes authorities for nearly 9 years. In 1995, he is arrested and convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms in prison. Jeff Fort, who is already incarcerated, is sentenced to spend an additional 80 years in prison.
This was the first instance in the United States history that American citizens had been convicted for attempting to commit a terrorist act for a foreign government.
For Chicago police, the El Rucan case is a major victory. A dangerous street gang has been destroyed. For the FBI, the El Rucan case is a battle won in the ongoing war against terrorism.